Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to George Croft's American Music Show. Today, we are joined by author Diane Diekman. Diane has written biographies on Farron Young, Marty Robbins, and Randy Travis, as well as several memoirs of her own life. And it was great to be able to sit down with her and talk about some of the people we've covered on the show and get some cool stories. And you can find her work at dianediekman.com, and you can pick up all of her books there. Please head over there and show her some love. And you can also find the audiobooks on Amazon. And if you want to reach out to Diane, you can reach her at diane@dianediekman.com. So please welcome to the show, Diane Diekman. Ladies and gentlemen, this episode of the show is brought to you by the Marysville Barber Parlor at 414 4th Street in Marysville. I am an absolute snob when it comes to my barbershop experience. I like to walk in. I like there to be cool stuff on the walls, cool vibes, good conversation, usually a free beer in the fridge, and they don't charge you an arm and a leg, and they do a killer job. So it is my kind of spot. I love hanging out in there. And for a limited time, if you walk into the Marysville Barber Parlor and tell them that George Croft's Music Show sent you, you will get $10 off your first haircut. So go get yourself $10 off a killer haircut with our friends down at the Marysville Barber Parlor. Thanks for watching the show. Awesome. Well, Diane Diekman, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really can't tell you how much I appreciate you being here.
I appreciate the invitation. Looking forward to it.
Awesome. So let's just start off by I'd like to get to know you a little bit. So you did an entire career in the Navy, is that correct?
That's right. I joined the Navy when I graduated from college. I served 32 years and I retired as a captain.
Man. So, and then did you always want to be an author, or did you just kind of get the idea after you kind of wanted to tell Farron Young's story? Like which one of those two things came first?
No, I didn't have an interest in writing. My interest was in my job in the Navy, and I do a lot of writing there as an officer, so I always tried to improve and cut out worthless words. And military writing was always so bloated, so I always worked on tightening it. And then in the early 90s, I wanted to start telling my family stories, so that's actually what got me interested in writing.
Oh,
and
okay.
and I also published a monthly column in my hometown newspaper about my
Wow.
travels around the world and such. So then when Farron died in 1996 while I was in Japan, that's what got me really thinking about. I knew I was going to have to retire someday, and I'd need something to do after I retired, so I decided I wanted to write biographies, and his would be the first one.
Oh, that's all. So you wrote for your memoirs, did you write those while you were in the Navy, or did those come
Yes,
after the
yes.
fact?
No,
Gotcha.
I
Okay.
started writing my childhood story. It was about 1994. I worked on it several years.
Gotcha.
And then when I was over in Japan, I I pretty much finished writing that one, and I started on one about my Navy career, and that was the same time that, so I was already working on my memoirs, and then Farron died, and then I got interested in telling his story and writing a
Wow.
biography.
That's awesome. So when did you first come across Farron Young's music, and when did you notice that it was having the kind of lasting impact on you?
I grew up with country music. That's what my parents played in the house, and the first songs I remember hearing were Johnny Cash's "I Walk the Line" and Marty Robbins' "White Sport Coat and a Pink Carnation." And I just always enjoyed country music. And of course, Farron, I liked him. And then while I was in college, there used to be a Grand Ole Opry show come through town once a month or so, and I saw all the different stars on that, and that was where I
Wow.
first met Farron. And then I saw him about every place I would be close enough after that. I saw him in concert about 13 times total in different
Holy
states.
cow. That's awesome. So so you were in, so just growing up, you were in a town where the Opry show would come through?
When I was
And
in
then
college in Sioux
college. Oh,
Falls,
okay. Gotcha.
then
Okay.
there were some others, like my parents took us to one back when I was 5 years old, and I that was when I fell in love with Carl Smith, uh, and I I'm not sure if we went to any others, but when the country music movies came out, like Waylon Jennings' Nashville Rebel, my dad took my sister and me to see that one, and it was just always a family thing listening to country music.
Man, that's awesome. So so going to that many shows, I mean, when you said you got to meet him, was it the kind of thing where like, I feel like after you show up to more than a couple and the artist sees the same face in the crowd after a while, he starts to pick you out. Like, did you develop kind of a rapport with him after all those shows you went to?
We did. Well, the first show at at in Sioux Falls here, I was planning to walk back to my college dorm that night. I was talking to the band members, and Farron overheard that, I guess, and he wasn't gonna let me walk back to college. So they put
Wow.
me on the bus, and his tour bus took me back to my college dorm, and they drove into this circular driveway, which they couldn't possibly drive through the driveway. And then I was hoping that nobody would see me get off the bus, but then the driver shone the spotlight on the side of the building, so, of course, everybody inside would've looked outside to see what's this bright light from, and then here's
Man,
Diane getting off this Farron Young bus.
that's you
So,
being modest. I
after that,
would, yeah.
um, I I guess I probably mentioned that the next time I saw him, and then, yes, he he recognized me, and he followed my career, so each time he'd see me standing down front with all the other people, he would salute, and
Oh
we talked
man,
about the military sometimes, so, yeah, we became acquainted that way.
that's awesome. Yeah, I would say that's you being modest. Because if it was me, I'd want everybody seeing me come off that bus.
I was
Be
kinda
like,
bashful back then.
yeah, I'd be like, guess who just got a ride home from Farron Young? That's amazing, man. So okay, obviously, okay, so that makes sense. So obviously, I mean, once you have that experience, you're a fan for life. I feel like you're in.
Yes, yes.
That's amazing. So which did you have a specific song of his that you really connected to at first, or was it just the whole experience of him helping you out and being a nice guy and kind of being approachable?
The 2 songs that stick in my mind are "It's 4 in the Morning," when that came out because I'd already met him several times, and "Step Aside," that one also. He he came to a couple towns in this area during those couple years, so here were his new songs playing on the radio that we could see him singing in person, so I would say "It's 4 in
Man.
the Morning" and "Step Aside" were the 2 memorable ones from back then.
Oh man, that's awesome. Man. So as time kind of, so what year would that have been when you first, sorry, I think you said it before, but what year was that when you first, like,
70. But when I first
1970?
met him was 70, I remember it was St. Patrick's Day, 70, and then
Wow.
for the next couple of years, he would a lot of those the Opry stars, they would tour through, like, once a year or so.
Okay. Man. So that's, and then I would imagine you follow him pretty closely for, for the rest of his career here. And then,
Yes.
so what was that like? Was his death the thing that kind of made you think, okay, I want to write a book about him and tell his story? Or were you already kind of thinking that you wanted to write a book about him before that happened?
No, not while he was, alive. We eventually got to know each other well enough that he gave me his home phone number, which he didn't
Oh,
always
wow.
answer the phone. But when I got my orders to transfer to Japan in '96, then I called him and we talked for a bit. And he, like my dad, they both always enjoyed talking about how much they hated the army during their couple of years in the army, and I told Farron that I'd been promoted to captain, and I said I told them that I would like to stay where I was because 'cause I'd never had 2 tours in a row before, and I said, "But if they were gonna make me a captain, I was willing to go to Japan," and Farron said, Isn't that just like the military? You tell them you like what you're doing, you tell them you wanna stay where you are, and they ship your ass to Japan.
Yep. Yep. That
And
sounds
and
about right.
and that was our final conversation because it was only about 4 months after that in
I was going to say,
December
yeah,
he died.
1996. Yeah.
A
Man.
and then after his death, I noticed that people seem to be forgetting about him. The only time I would ever hear his name mentioned was like he was talking about Willie Nelson, and then they'd say, "Well, he wrote Hello Walls for Fair and Young," and a lot of like, of course, I was in Japan, so I didn't get a lot of news, but a lot of sources that news articles I would see where I thought Farron should have been mentioned in there, he never was, and that got me started thinking about writing his biography because I didn't want him to be forgotten. Plus, I thought I all these country stars I had grown up listening to be able to contact them and talk to them, and everybody had Fair and Young stories. I thought, what a wonderful opportunity that would be to talk to all these people that I'd admired all these years.
Yeah. Yeah. That was my, so I'm a little bit guilty of that. When I first started doing the show, I was aware of Hello Walls and, and 4 in the Morning. I was familiar with his music, but I didn't know anything about his story. But as I started doing other episodes on other people, I kept seeing his name bounce off all these other people that I was doing episodes on. The first one was when I was doing, I found it in the Hank Williams episode, and then that led me to the episode that I did about Billie Jean Horton and kind of how Farron was, he was the guy that brought her to the Opry when Hank swooped him off of her,
Right.
and that made me think like, okay, I gotta really dig in here, and there's more story to be had here, and then yeah, I came away from that with the same kind of like, why doesn't this guy have like way more of a name recognition, and why, like I kind of started to wonder, and part of me thought like maybe in the aftermath, like his death, you know that maybe that kind of kept people from calling back to him and kind of like wanting to bring him to the fore because it was so sad and tragic. Like I wonder if that has affected his, you know, his legacy power, as people wanting to keep talking about him and bringing his name up. But as far as like his impact on the music industry is just undeniable. Like, yeah, there's
Yes.
a, yeah, I thought that was, it's sad, and it's kind of like I said, I came away from that feeling bad for him and thinking, oh man, like you wonder like what was the chicken or the egg, like if he had gotten more recognition while he was alive, like would that have helped him, or like which caused the other, kind of a thing, was kind of where my brain started to kind of go, because I feel like he, and tell me if I'm wrong here, but like even by the 90s, I think he kind of felt ignored already, right? Like he was
He
starting to
retired. He
yeah,
retired from touring in the early '90s, and
uh,
I believe he suffered from depression all his life, and I don't know if that was what helped him decide to retire, or if he got tired of the business, or if he. I don't think he felt unappreciated because he is the one who shut out his friends. You hear
right,
stories about how the music business forgot him. Well, no, it didn't. When his friends would wanna come visit him, he wouldn't answer the phone, he wouldn't be
gotcha.
home, they'd invite him to come to the Opry, he wouldn't do it, and I think he was in the throes of depression at that time.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's and when you're doing your, digging into a story, can you pinpoint a time where you feel like that kind of took a turn for the worse? Because I feel like there are stories, like I came across one story that would have been, I guess, 1979, I guess, where it was like when Merle Kilgore moved into his mansion and they were just doing like the bro life where he was like cooking dinner for Merle Kilgore like all the time, and they were kind of just,
Okay.
now he was still married at the time. So that kind of, I was a little bit confused about that. So like he was, his marriage already kind of deteriorating by the late 70s, so he was spending a lot of time at this other house, because I don't think his family was in the mansion with Merle Kilgore, right? Like that was
Not
kind of the boys
not
club.
not at that time. No, he and Hilda had separated for several years, and
Gotcha.
then they got back together again. So, as I recall the story, then Hilda and Alana moved to the lake house with Farron, and that
Gotcha.
was where they she left him for the final time was the night he shot holes in the kitchen ceiling, and she said
Yes.
she'd had enough. And then she started divorce proceedings after that. But there had been a period where they had separated. Farron thought that she was he blamed her for getting overweight and being no longer attractive to him. Well, he
Oh.
was an alcoholic and she didn't wanna live with his alcoholism. So, they decided to get back together. He was gonna quit drinking, she was gonna lose weight, and they were gonna live happily ever after. And when you're married to an alcoholic, that doesn't usually happen.
Yeah, that's tough. That sounds like there were yeah, that's a tough deal to make. and, and it's kind of like yeah, I think that more is just especially now. I feel like the conversation around addiction and alcoholism now is much different than it
It
was at
oh,
the
it is.
time.
It
Right.
is.
So at the time it was viewed much more as this thing where like, well, why can't you just get your act together and stop drinking and then we'll just everything will be good. And he probably really meant it when he said he was going to try,
I'm
but
sure.
it's kind of it's not funny is not the right word, but it's interesting that like that he would put a caveat on her. It was like, well, I'll quit drinking if you lose weight. then,
Well,
then
that's what alcoholics and abusers
right,
do
yeah,
is
because that
they
like
for
because now
quota.
in context you could see how he was leaving the door open to himself. Where like if she didn't hold up her end, it would open the door to him not really having to hold up his end. And
Exactly.
that yeah, so he was kind of setting a trap for her. Sounds like from the jump there. That's yeah, that's unfortunate, but man, I mean, but even during that time, I mean, everybody in Nashville at the time was on something. I mean, it was everybody was drinking and doing
Of
pills and
course.
coke and everything else. Like it was a wild time. So I feel like the he wasn't alive in a time where there was a lot of social like support in that way. Like where if he went and told all of us, like like imagine telling Johnny Cash before he got sober, or telling Merle Kilgore or any of these guys, like, hey, I'm not drinking anymore, and I got to clean my life up. I don't feel like that group would have been like, hey, good for you, man. Like, way to get your act together, because they're all in the same boat.
Exactly. When Farron went through his periods of like perhaps it was when he and Hilda got back together, I don't know, but when he went through his periods of sobriety, then he would go out on tour and the show promoters and everybody else would try to get him to drink because
Yeah.
they enjoyed drinking with him. They were used to drinking with him, and for him not to get drunk, that just didn't sit well with him. So and for a while there were riders in his contracts that said he could not drink, uh, during or before the show or whenever, but the promoters who signed those contracts were the same ones who were trying to get him to drink.
Do you think there was a little bit of like? Do you think they were sadistic enough to try to do that so that then he wasn't holding up his contract and they didn't have to pay him as much, or do you think it was really just social? They just liked
It
drinking with the
it
guy.
could have been both. I don't know.
Man, that's dark. Yeah, so did Farron's drinking ever get to the point where he was like kind of doing the Hank Williams and George Jones thing where he's like missing shows and not showing up for stuff and he's just kind of a wreck, or did he kind of was he
Yeah.
always able to perform?
No. He uh, always made the show. There were sometimes some stories I've heard if they had 3 shows, like if they had a matinee and then they had 2 shows in the evening, he may be wasted by the 3rd show, but he would have
Oh,
put on a wonderful matinee, and he was always there. I don't recall I can't recall any show that he didn't show up for,
wow.
or that he couldn't go on to
Right,
do his
and at least give
performance.
people their money's worth, or at least most of it.
Right.
Wow, that's amazing. So yeah, so and then obviously, he retires. You're in Japan, and then you get the news that he had committed suicide. So what was that moment like for you? Because that's I mean, I cried when Toby Keith died, just because I love Toby Keith and I loved, I was a fan, but I didn't know the guy. Like that was, like I wasn't like, he wasn't my friend. I didn't have his phone number. But like,
Mm.
did you feel like, I would imagine you would have gotten that just with the volume cranked way up because you actually knew him and you had his phone number. But then we're also in this weird position where are you on a, like, did anyone call you to be like, hey, are you okay? Like,
Oh,
sorry about Farron, like, or was this kind of, you just had to observe from a
oh
distance?
no, I felt completely alone in Japan.
Oh
Nobody else
man.
around there knew who he was, and we didn't get a whole lot of news. And the reason I heard about it was on Armed Forces radio. I was listening to it one night, and they gave these little couple-minute news blurbs, and it said that country singer Farron Young had shot himself and was in the
Oh
hospital. And I
man.
just sat straight up. I was reading in bed that night, and I just sat straight up
Oh,
because I couldn't believe I'd heard what they said. And then for the next several days, I checked the Stars and Stripes magazine trying to find some information about him, and there
oh
wasn't
man.
any. All the news at that time was about O.J. Simpson and
Oh,
following his vehicle down the road,
I didn't
and
even think
his
about that.
his
Yeah.
trials and all that. The news was consumed with that, and, being in Japan, there wasn't even anybody I knew that I could commiserate with because, they would just, "Well, who's Farron Young?" And
Right.
I
Oh
did see a
man.
little blurb a couple days later in the Stars and Stripes magazine that said he had died. But when I got that night, when I heard that on the news, I immediately called his house, and I got voicemail, of course, and I left a voicemail. And
Oh
later
man.
on, years later, when I was interviewing people, I talked to his attorney, one of his attorneys, and he said he was the one who had listened to Farron's voicemails, and he remembered hearing my message, uh,
Oh man.
hoping he would be okay.
Oh man. That must have been rough. Yeah. What a set. And like I said, I feel like too, I mean, was your family aware of how much you adored Farron Young at the time? Like, did anyone think to call you and be like, hey, like, like even from your inner circle, like not people in the music business?
Well, yes, my family did, and several of
Okay.
my family members had met Farron. My sister and I went to a lot of shows together, and she was in the Navy at the time also. And I don't recall the family conversations. I knew it immediately when it came out on the news that night, so I would have heard it as soon as they got the news in the States. But I don't know that about like when he died. I don't remember if any of my family called me at that time or not.
Man. So, yeah, so that memory is just kind of having to deal with that on your own in Japan, huh?
That's what I did.
Man,
Yeah.
man. But well, I mean, good on you though for deciding to continue with the story. I mean, that's quite the commitment to make, and I feel like you did a great job. That
Thank
was
you.
It's a very cool, because yeah, like I said, like when I was doing research, like your work is the first stuff that pops up. Like when you're trying to
Good.
learn about Farron Young, kind of get your wheels under you as far as trying to get his story figured out. Like I said, other than when you see his name pop up in works about other people, and he's always this
Right.
tangential character that just kind of pops in. But yeah, no, that was very
He
cool to
he
have
helped a
that.
lot of people get their careers started. He supported them, and of course, you probably know that he co-founded the Music City News magazine in '63, which was the most used trade magazine for decades.
Yeah, wow, that is. So, what is your favorite Farron Young story, like from his interactions in the music business, and kind of because I've heard some good ones that are just kind of that the stories you find about him. He seems like this great time having guy, and just kind of he had a great sense of humor, and he was sharp, and he was cracking jokes with people, and like he was a like people were well, on the one hand, I've heard people say like whether or not you made it in Nashville depended on if Farron Young liked you. That
Yeah.
like he could snuff somebody out if they said something rude, or if they, if Farron Young didn't like you, you weren't gonna make it in Nashville. But on the other side, if he did like you were in, and it just sounds like they had so many fun times and just hilarious stories that you hear from his interactions with people. But yeah, what's your favorite one?
I don't know that I'd have a favorite one because there were a lot of funny stories that I heard about him. I do recall one I read recently that Jerry Kennedy had told me about, that Hilda had called Jerry one morning and said Farron wouldn't be able to make it to his recording session that afternoon because he had had a fight with the hanging plants out in the driveway, and apparently he had come home like 2 o'clock in the morning drunk, and and as he was walking to the house, he didn't know Hilda had hung all these potted plants, so he thought he was being attacked by somebody, and he's beating on these plants, and apparently he got injured somehow, so I don't know if it was his injuries or if he was just that hungover
Right,
that
just
she called to cancel the session next day, but, I mean, there were many hilarious stories about him,
yeah, he's just
mostly
on the
because he
front
was
porch
drunk.
swinging at the pottery.
Yeah.
Man. So what was his how close was he with Johnny Cash? That was one thing where I felt like there was a disconnect between my understanding and the way the story went, because there's not a ton of stories of like him like working with Johnny Cash, I don't think. But then when he dies, his ashes are spread at Johnny Cash's house. So what was their relationship like, and how did that kind of become the state of things?
They they were friends, they knew each other from way back in the '50s when they both appeared on the Opry, and they did some shows together. I'm not sure if they were under different management or what the reason was that they didn't tour together, although they did perform together, but their birthdays were one day apart.
That's
And
right.
that
Yeah.
was one of their connections that they often talked about. So they were good friends, and they when they both had houses on the lake, and a lot of people at that time had houseboats, and they would visit each other around the lake and visit their houseboats and those kinds of things. So when Farron died, then his son Robin, as I remember the story, asked the Cashes if he could spread the ashes at their place, and they said yes, of course, that but they weren't home at the time, a- and they gave permission, and that worked out, and they put that little plaque of my sister and I went to visit the house after Johnny and June had died, and the house was on the market, and I was doing a research trip. We got permission from Tommy Cash to go out to the house, and we found the Farron Young Memorial Garden was still there with that little plaque that said
Nice.
Farron Young Memorial Garden on it.
Oh man. And was this after or before the house had burned down later? Was it
Th- this this was before the house burned down not too long after that.
right? But I'm saying like when you went back and found the plaque, like this was
Right.
after the
No, the
house had
house
burned down
was
or
still
before?
standing.
Gotcha,
The
gotcha.
the
Okay.
house, it was empty at the time. It was on the market. Tommy Cash's real estate agent or agency had it listed for sale, and he gave us
Gotcha.
permission to go out there. We couldn't get in the house, but we walked around, and we found the garden and walked down to the edge of the lake and that sort of thing.
Wow. That's pretty cool. Yeah, that's yeah, I was kind of wondering, but like do you know why they chose to do it at Johnny Cash's house and not at Farron's lake house? It's the same lake, right? Like they're all like they're
It's the same lake, yes. Well, Farron no longer had a house there. That
oh,
that
okay.
was the connection that Robin knew that Johnny and June still lived there, and they were good friends. And I have no idea if it started out. I think the Cashes called Robin or Hilda after Farron died to give their condolences and that kind of thing. So I don't remember if they offered, or is there anything you need, or how
Right.
that came about.
Gotcha. So they just wanted to put his ashes in the lake, and Johnny Cash had access to the lake still. So that was kind
Yes,
of
yes.
gotcha. Okay. That makes
And like
sense.
I said, Farron was important enough that they made the Farron Young Memorial Garden on their property after that.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. Man, what a career, and what a yeah, it's a so when you were doing your research for the fair, did you when you came across the Billie Jean Horton part of this, did you ever dig into that and like dig into her story and kind of see, because that was a fascinating, like her story arc is incredible.
It is. Yeah. Well, I had a pretty good outline. I didn't do any deep research, but I knew the way the story went, and I heard Farron's stories and different ones about how he and Billie Jean were dating, and when he went to Nashville, she went with him, and I i- interviewed Ken Nelson, who was Farron's producer at the time, and Ken told me that he had brought Billie Jean to the Opry that night, or Farron asked him to watch over her, or something like that. And when Hank told Farron that he he wanted that girl, Farron, as I put it in the book, Farron was more interested in his career than in any woman.
Right.
So if Hank uh, Williams wanted his girlfriend, and it might further Farron's career, to be on his good side, that was all good.
Yeah. So, okay, maybe you can help clarify something for me. So I've heard, the internet is a wild place. So all kinds of stories get
Oh
put out
yeah.
there. But I've heard one account says that Hank Williams pulled a gun on Farron Young in that interaction and was like, "I'm taking your girlfriend." Is that true, or do you think that's some
That's one
lore?
of the stories that Farron told,
Oh,
that evening, apparently. I mean, at the Opry is where Hank met Billie Jean, but
right.
that's not where the story ended. They went over to Hank's place after that, and Farron tells the story about it sometime during the evening that Hank pulled a gun and said, "I want her." And that goes back to what I mentioned before, that Farron's attitude was, "Hey, you want her, you can have her."
Yeah, that's
He was
incredible.
more interested in furthering his musical career.
Yeah.
Farron knew he could find as many women as he wanted.
Yeah, I know. I kind of when I was doing the Farron Young episode, I was kind of thinking about like the full circle moment of like, because there was that moment where Hank was in the parking lot looking up at Hank Williams, who was on the back balcony of whatever venue he had just
Oh,
played.
at the hayride, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
and Farron has that kind of cool moment where he's like, "Hey, I'm gonna work with you someday,"
Yep,
and then Hank's kind of like, "All right, man, good luck to you," and then like cut to Hank's taking his girlfriend at gunpoint.
yep, for
It's like
for
that's
for sure.
yeah, what a weird moment that would. And yeah, like what do you say? Like what if like even if Farron was going to be like, "No, man, I really like her." Like what, your idol is pointing a gun at you, says he's taking your
Yeah.
girlfriend. That might be the only option, is like, "All right."
True. I don't think there was any serious concern of threat of life or anything
Right,
like
yeah.
that. I'm sure it was considered a joke that
Right,
it
but
was pointing
yeah,
the gun at him. But yeah, when you look at Farron's priorities in those days, he wanted to be the next Hank Williams.
yeah.
Don't let a woman get in the way of that.
Yeah, that's incredible. Yeah, that's I know. I always thought like I think Billie Jean is still alive, and
She
I think
is,
she's in a
yes.
nursing home in Shreveport or
Uh,
something, I think.
I think so.
Yeah, I'm like, man, I would love to pick her brain and be like, what was that like from her angle, getting like the two giant names in country music are fighting over you. Like what a wild minute that must have been for her.
There have been a lot of people who wanted to talk to her, write her story or whatever. You know, of course, I tried to get in touch with her too for an interview, and that time she was still healthy, but she wasn't. But I had no luck in connecting with her,
Yeah.
and I don't believe that she's ever told her story, that anyone's been able to write a valid book about her, but she
Yeah, I
is
don't think
still
so.
alive. I don't know what kind of shape she's in.
Yeah, I think she's 93 now, I think. But yeah, I got to thinking about that too, because when I did, because like I said, I did a full episode on her, and the comments on the internet were like not nice. Like people, for whatever reason, there's a corner of the internet that they call her all kinds of names and kind of
Of
like
course.
because of her impact and all these different people that she was married to. And so I kind of feel like, man, if she's aware of that, or if the family's aware of that, and then people are calling wanting interviews and stuff, I'd probably say no too, because that's, I mean, you're
Well,
opening yourself up to wake all that stuff up again.
yeah, you'd have to vet the request, that's for sure, and decide whether someone was a person that you should actually talk to.
Right. But I mean, like, even just the idea of, even if you talk to a person who's there in good faith and going to do a good interview and really try to get your life
True.
story right, the market's reaction, if it's going to be a bunch of negativity and people hounding your grandma who just wants to, be left alone, like, it might not be worth engaging, even if the interviewer themselves is, is out to
And
do a good job.
and that may well be.
Yeah. Yeah. What a crazy story though. But okay. So you write the Fair and Young biography. And then how do you move from doing that? I think I saw you say in an interview that you had thought about doing a Merle Haggard book also, but that like when I think you were talking about it was either Merle Haggard or Randy
That
Travis.
that came much later, yes.
Oh, right. I don't
I
want to skip the Marty Robbins book. Yeah. So
Okay.
that came
Well,
next.
I kind of merged into that one. Well, I should say when I started writing my Fair and Young biography, I knew nothing about writing biographies. I knew nothing about the publishing business. I knew nothing about the music industry other than having been a fan. But I decided I was going to write this biography of Farron and it will be published. I had no idea how that was gonna happen, so this was 1999 when I
Man.
was just getting close to move back from Japan on my way to live in Los Angeles, and I picked a date of 2007 as a publication date because that would have been Farron's 75th birthday, and I figured by 2000, if when I said that, then people wouldn't always be hounding me about, well, is it published yet? Have you finished it yet? If I set a date that far into the future, and then also I thought, well, within that time, maybe I'll figure out how to write a biography
Right.
and get it done. And my sister Kao and I, in the fall of '99, we went to Shreveport for Tillman Franks's birthday party,
Oh,
and
cool.
Tillman, of course, used to be on the hayride, and Farron was in Tillman's band back at the beginning, and at at that point, at on that day, I met quite a few people, who were also Farron's friends, so I introduced myself and made connections then for doing interviews with quite a few of them, and Tillman had this program where the band got up there and all these musicians from Farron's era all honored Tillman by singing at his birthday party, and
Wow.
I decided right then, when I write Farron's biography, I'll have a book release party in Nashville, and I'll have a country deputies band playing and get some of these singers to sing, and at that time, I didn't even know who Farron's band members were or how to get in touch with them, but I just knew that someday, and it turned out in November of 2007, we had a book release party at the Ernest Hub Record Shop, and the Country Deputies played that night on the Midnight Jamboree, and, I just stood there and I thought, Wow. It came true. And
Man.
I did
Yeah,
this.
because you just started with a pen and a can-do attitude and you pulled it off. That's
That's right.
amazing.
I knew it was gonna work. I had no
Oh
idea how,
man,
but
that's
I
incredible.
believed it would succeed.
So how did you even land an invite to Tillman Franks' birthday party? Like that's not. I feel like they're not just sending those out. How'd you?
It must have been advertised, that it was
Oh,
happening. I'm not really sure if I contacted somebody at that point, but we combined it with it was my first Fair and Young research trip because, of course, it was his home, so Ko and I went down there, she drove and I flew, and we met in Shreveport, and then we toured Farron's childhood homes and all that, and
wow,
that one night we went to Tillman's party, which was yeah, you're right, I woulda had a ticket to get to it, but I don't remember who I
that's
got it
awesome.
from, but by that time, I had been talking to several people, I guess, so one of them must have hooked me up, I
That's
don't know.
amazing. Yeah. Yeah, I'm actually I think next week I'll be so my I call him my uncle, but he's a very close family friend is Tillman's nephew. And I think he's coming on the show next week
Oh, really?
to talk about Tillman, yeah, and kind of share some stories from that. And yeah, it's super because Tillman went on I think Tillman was one of the only because when so after the fact and then when Johnny Horton died, Tillman was one of the other four people in the car, I
He
think,
was,
when they
yes.
crashed. Yeah. So I'm like
He
I
was
can't wait
in
to
the
get the
car.
Tillman Frank stories. Yeah, there's got
Yep.
to just be a million of them. But man, okay. So and this is so you kind of get your foot in the door here. You get the Farron book succeeds,
Oh,
and
yes,
you're
and then you ask about Marty Robbins. So
right. So yeah. So how do we
it
get
was in
to there?
2005. I retired from the Navy in 2004, so all this other stuff I'd been on active duty while I was doing it, and and then I spent most of the year of 2005 finishing the biography and looking for a publisher. And one day I ran across, YouTube was just starting then.
Right
Most of
in
my
its
research
infancy.
had
Yeah,
had
back
not
then.
been internet research, but I ran across this video of Farron and I think George Jones were guests on Marty Robbins' Spotlight show. And watching those guys made me realize, well, Marty's also one of my favorite singers. And I checked to make sure he hadn't had a biography written on him. And I thought, same questions I'd ask myself about Farron. Will I ever get tired of listening to his music? No. Will I ever
Yeah,
get tired of talking about him? No. A- and and with Marty, there the other facets of his career besides his country music, which of course I loved his music all my life. Like I said, one of the first songs I ever heard was that I remember was White Sport Coat. A but also, he had been in the Navy during World War II.
that's
He'd been a
right.
combat
Yeah,
sailor in the South Pacific, and, of course, he was a NASCAR driver, and I thought those would be interesting to research NASCAR and World War II in the South Pacific in addition to talking about his whole career. So, yeah, I
that's
started
amazing.
working on that. And then my publisher at the University of Illinois Press, I had connected with them and they'd agreed to publish Farron's biography. And then they contacted me and they said, we understand you're writing a biography about Marty Robbins. And I said, yes, I am. And they wanted to publish it. So the
Oh man,
publisher came to me.
nice. Yeah. So your can do attitude and your just hard work on the first one kind of grease the tracks for the next two. Is that
Yep.
nice? That's amazing. Yeah, that was something that I picked up on in the Marty Robbins story because I did an episode on Marty Robbins also, and the parallel between because there's that weird moment where after he gets home, I think it's after he gets home from World War II, where he leaves his family for a brief second. It's like a couple of weeks or something where he like hits the road to go do the rock star thing and then just decides that was a mistake. I'm coming back and he promises his wife will never leave again. And because his dad had done the same thing during World War One, right? Like for Marty Robbins' dad had like gone off to war, come back super tortured, and had left and just kind of walked out on everybody. And I drew those two moments together as like Marty must have realized that he did the exact same thing that his dad had done that traumatized him as a kid. And like I wonder how much of it was just he went out on the road doing the rock star thing and didn't like it and decided, you know what, the family life is better, versus he was comparing himself to his dad the whole time, and he that must have just ate at him for that couple of weeks that he was gone.
He
Did you draw some of those parallels?
Well, I didn't find, where he was gone for several weeks. He in Arizona did have some problems and some newlywed problems, and yeah, Marty was learning to be a touring artist and that kind of thing, but, uh, his the parallels with his dad, and there may have been some of that, but his dad was an abusive alcoholic, and he but he didn't leave the family.
Oh,
He
I thought he
he
had.
No, no.
Oh,
He pulled the family along with him. His wife would be prepared to pack up the family in their home in the middle of the night and go to a different place because Johnny, the father, had been accused of stealing or something like that. So and then Marty was 13 when his mother finally got fed up and divorced his dad. But
gotcha.
they grew up on the desert, and his dad was always around until that point, but I mean, he would disappear for days at a time,
Right, right, right. Yeah,
going on a drunk or whatever, but then he would come home and he'd say, "Let's move," and then his wife would pack up all the kids and their stuff, and they'd go to another spot on the desert or something.
yeah. That reminds me. My brain is calling back to a couple of different episodes. I think I'm thinking about my Lefty Frizzell episode, but there was a moment where, yeah, I'm fairly certain it was Lefty Frizzell, but same kind of thing where his dad was just constantly up middle of the night, got to pick up and move, got in trouble for bootlegging in this town,
Yeah,
and they
yeah,
just moved to the next
yeah.
state, and were like, and a couple, and I, yeah, it couldn't have been Marty Robbins, but I think Lefty Frizzell's dad, and one of the times they moved is because he shot a guy in the middle of the night who tried to steal their bootleg liquor that they were selling at the time. Um,
Oh, yeah, I can't recall that
yeah, like I
about
said,
Lefty, but, with Marty's dad, it was such shame because he could do anything. He was so good at anything, carpentry work, making things, whatever he did, he could take pieces of nothing and build them a home on the desert. And he could have accomplished so much in his life, but it was the alcohol and then the theft, and I suppose he was getting, like you hear about drug addicts stealing all the time to get money for their drugs. I'm not sure. That may be what he was doing too.
yeah, that seems to be kind of a through line. Like dads like that seem to have occurred in a lot of different artists from that time. I think it was whatever that was. It was going around
Well,
because
I wrote about three of them.
right, yeah,
Marty and Sharon and Randy Travis all had dads that they had big problems with.
yeah, yeah. I don't think a nice comfortable. Well, yeah, a nice comfortable home life doesn't always lead to the greatness in country music that we're
Probably not.
accustomed to now. Yeah.
Yep.
Man, and I will say for Marty Robbins, he seemed the tragedy of the Marty Robbins story to me was like how much he really tried to do it right. Like he wasn't out there like doing the level of rock star stuff that he could have been doing. I mean, he had a 30-year career and he was a huge deal and he could have been doing anything he wanted, but it seems like he really did put an effort in on the home front to kind of to not mess it up between him and Arizona, and then even his son. I mean, his son talked about him being gone a lot, but the interactions that they did have seemed like Marty was like a good committed dad and like trying to do everything right, and he wasn't
Yeah.
he didn't pass on the generational trauma like he could have. And then it was heartbreaking to see the guy that really, as much as he could, did it right, and they still die young, and they there's some kind of
Well,
tragedy always
I don't
strikes.
think that has anything to do with it.
Yeah, no, like yeah, yeah, yeah. I guess yeah, you never know how things are going to shake down. But yeah, but then it's
No,
always,
no, for sure.
it's
With
interesting
Marty,
to see.
it was his heart. He'd had heart problems. He had his first
Yeah.
heart attack, went undiagnosed, so he ended up having 4 before one finally killed him. But,
Yeah.
and all, and he lived a lot of life considering he had a bad heart.
Yeah. And he was an insomniac too, right? So like he used to stay up late
Yes,
playing
yes,
shows.
he did. He
Yeah.
would wander after they moved to Nashville, he would wander the streets going to all the clubs at night, take one of his band members with him.
Yeah. Man, that's incredible. Cause yeah, cause like I said, even though he died young, like yeah, he had a 30-year career pretty much. Like just he packed a lot into a
He
relatively short, life that
he
he
did.
had.
That's right. When I was thinking of when I was writing his story and all the stuff he had done, and then I realized that he was only 57 when he died, and by the time I was writing, I was older than that, and
Right.
I couldn't imagine already being dead at that age.
Yeah. Like just the clock just ran out on him. Yeah.
It did.
That's man. But yeah, and like I said, it's he's one of the few that I feel like good luck finding a story where somebody is talking trash about Marty Robbins. He seems to have been just universally loved. I
Yes.
lost my camera. What happened here? But yeah, he seems to have just been like, yeah, like I said, universally loved and kind of, yeah, like he didn't make enemies. He wasn't out there stirring pots. He just seemed like he was a good guy and a talented musician and just,
Yep. Well, that was one of the things that I eventually started looking for in the biography because people nobody's perfect. Everybody's got some faults and shortcomings and you want to write about conflict you want to read about conflict in a story because that's what makes a story. So and I was hearing all this stuff about Marty being such a wonderful person from everybody I interviewed. So I started asking questions, did he have a dark side? Was there anything whatever? And the only thing I could come up with was that he was really hot-tempered.
yeah,
And I had a few instances where I could talk about him losing his temper, and that was the only negative thing that made him less than perfect that I could find to put in the book.
yeah. But it was usually with stuff like that. If I remember right, there were a couple interactions like that, like with band members, right, where it was him being a stickler about music and like if somebody was out of time or out of tune, like he was very sharp about that kind of thing, and he wasn't always
He
graceful
was
about
a
it.
perfectionist. Now, I don't know that he would have yelled at a band member in that case. I think he would have been more likely to carry them along and help them get better. But yes, he was a perfectionist, and I think that goes back to his childhood, and he always longed for security. He never felt secure, so he was always looking for security and approval. And he never got either one of them from his dad. He never got approval. His dad would badmouth him and beat him and all those kinds of things. And so I think Marty subconsciously sought approval as much as he consciously sought security. So everything had to be just right.
Yeah.
And he and yeah, he wouldn't tolerate mistakes, but I don't think he got mad about somebody making mistakes. I think he taught them how to do it better.
Yeah. Yeah, then there's part of me too that thinks like I don't know that you could be like the kind of guy that can get in a race car and get into that world and compete and be, and not have a little bit of fight in you, like have a
Yeah.
have
Well,
a line that you're not willing to
true,
let
true,
people
but
cross.
there's a difference between having fight in you and having anger in you. I
Yes.
mean, Marty was a competitor. There's no doubt about that, and he wanted to win, and that kinda goes with his perfectionism. He wanted everything done correctly, but he wanted to win, but, like, when it came to racing, for him, it was just fun and he enjoyed it. And he knew he was not going to win a race because he wasn't competitive with them. He just wanted to show up and get ahead of one once in a while. And for him, that was all good fun. But
Yeah.
there wasn't ever any kind of anger involved in any of that.
I just meant that like you got to be the guy that's capable of that, you know, to have that
True,
same
true.
drive and
You
kind of
you have to accept the challenges and be competitive, and he was definitely a
yeah.
competitor.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite Marty Robbins stories is when he took some part off of his car to make it go faster so we could win a race, and then
Yeah.
as soon as the race was
The
over, he was like, "All right, I cheated, but I just wanted to, feel what it was like to win
the
once."
restrictor rings at
Yeah, yeah.
Talladega. Yeah, he wanted to pass Richard Petty one time. He
That's
wanted to
right.
know what it felt like. So, and that story, I talked to the Allisons, so I covered that story in the book, and a lot of people get that wrong. That and Marty was selected for rookie of the race that day, and he said, "Oh, I can't accept it because my car didn't really run that well." But it was Eddie Allison that had done it. Somebody tells a story about Marty taking the distributor up to his room and all that kind of stuff. But no, it
Oh.
was Eddie Allison, the mechanic, who did it.
So
And
he had
Bobby
accomplices.
Bobby and Eddie both told me that Eddie was banned from NASCAR for life
Oh, wow.
after doing that, and he got fined,
Really?
and Marty paid his fine.
Wow, that's incredible. Huh. Yeah, I guess it didn't occur to me that like that he would have had accomplices in doing that. And
Oh,
that
oh,
kind of
yeah.
changes the tenor of the story a little bit where
Well,
it's
yeah, and see, and the Allisons and everybody else was upset with Marty because to them it was all part of the game. The drivers did whatever they could get away with to tweak things and the inspectors were always out there trying to find the drivers doing something wrong. So the drivers were always
oh,
trying to do stuff that would slide by. And see, this had been a success. They had slid this by and Marty had done well.
wow.
But Marty could not accept an award for something that he knew he'd cheated on.
Wow.
And,
Okay,
and
so
eh,
that's amazing. So yeah, so it wasn't as much a he did it intentionally as a joke to just feel it. It was that people were pulling whatever kind of fast moves they could, and then he won an award that he felt like he didn't deserve. So he had to.
right, right. I
Wow.
mean,
Okay.
it was all in fun until Marty was selected for this award.
Right. So you
That
think if he hadn't won, we wouldn't have that story? That would have
if he
just.
hadn't been chosen as rookie of the race, it's my guess that nobody would know this story except,
Wow.
in the back room they talk about it sometime. It would not have been publicity because they wouldn't have known it. And like and Donnie Allison told Marty at the time, "Well, why'd you tell them? We do this kind of stuff all the time. The drivers try to see what they can get away with. And if they get caught, they get
Wow.
fined, no big deal. They go on and try something else." But
Wow.
Marty,
But Marty got banned, or not Marty, but the Allison got
Eddie,
banned.
the mechanic, yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That's crazy. Yeah, that must have been do you think I mean, I wonder if Marty had an idea that that would happen, or was that a consequence that Marty probably didn't think of when he did it, and that's why he felt bad and paid his fines? Was that
Right, right. I would think
gotcha?
that I would expect he'd figure it was just dropped, that if he'd say, no, uh, I can't accept that award." But see, then the Allisons also believe that the NASCAR hierarchy headed in for the Allison gang. If it had been some other group, it might have passed. But
Oh
this
man,
this gave the NASCAR bigwigs an excuse to get at the Allisons.
wow! And was Marty aware of that dynamic, like heading into it, or do you think it was just kind of an afterthought? Like,
I don't know. I mean,
I wonder.
no, that wouldn't have been part of the issue from Marty's perspective and from Eddie's perspective at the beginning. They were just doing this to see if it worked,
Right,
and it
but I
worked.
guess what I mean is that, like, I wonder if Marty had been more aware that the bigwigs were had it out for the
Oh,
Ellisons, that if he'd have known, hey, this is gonna get, this, they're gonna
could
escalate
be.
this to getting this
Yep,
dude banned.
yep.
I
But
wonder if
he
Marty might not have said anything.
that may have changed things, and it probably would have. He would have had to decide what to do, and maybe he would have discussed it with them first before saying anything. But uh,
Wow.
I'm sure Marty thought, well, I can't accept this award, so if I just tell him, well, hey, no, uh, we cheated on this one, the subject would have just been dropped. They would have just given the award to somebody else, and that would have been the end of it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, which ironically is how the story kind of shook down into history, where it's like that's at least that's the story that I came across. It's like, oh, Marty did it, and then kind of just like, oh, it was just a joke,
yeah,
and but what that leaves out is the
it didn't.
moral stand that he took in the moment, that it wasn't a
Right.
joke at the time, and he took
It
that stand out of a place of like a moral
it
standing of
turned out not not to be a joke because once they gave him that award, Marty with his integrity, could not accept it. But I'm
yeah,
sure he had no idea of the repercussions that would cause for the Allison gang.
yeah, that's amazing.
Because
Wow.
after it did, Eddie told me that Marty paid his fine. So, Marty did what he could to fix things after that.
Yeah, yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, what a wild. That's so cool. I love that kind of stuff where it's like, you find out little details that make the
Well, that's
story totally different.
one of the neat things about being a biographer, and, you talk to different people and you piece these stories together.
Yeah, that's incredible. So, okay, so I know we're going for time here, but so how do you move from the Marty Robbins documentary to now we're getting into Randy Travis?
Okay, well,
This
then after I finished Marty's biography, then I got to thinking that, well, I'd like to write a biography about a person who is still living because I'd written about Farron and Marty, and I consider those community service projects because they didn't have enough of there wasn't it's a niche market. There aren't many people who are going to buy that book, relatively speaking. It won't become a bestseller about a dead country western musician. So I wanted to write a biography of someone who was still living, someone who I admired and liked the music, someone who did not have a biography already written on them, and someone I would enjoy writing about, and someone who had a big enough fan base that I thought, "Maybe I could have a bestseller this time."
There you go.
So the 2 people that came to mind were Merle Haggard and Randy Travis, so I started pursuing both of them. I sent Randy birthday cards and said I'd like to write his biography. I contacted Merle's publicity people and had several conversations with them, and they told me that Merle absolutely did not want his biography written, and he wouldn't even let his staff talk to him about it. And so I thought, well, I'm not one who's trying to write an unauthorized biography. I'm
Right. Yeah.
don't don't have the staff to do that. So
Yeah.
and then Merle died. So I
Right.
thought, "Oh, perfect timing." Uh, so
Right.
I I contacted them, several months later or whatever, and said, I'd like to write his biography. And it was just, I'm not looking for approval. You don't have to get anybody's permission to write a biography,
Right.
but you have to think about the consequences. And I did not want um, the estate or whatever
Right.
trying to stop me from writing it
Right.
because I
Yeah.
don't have a legal team. I can't fight anything like that. I don't have that kind of money that I'm willing to go against
Yeah.
somebody's family or whatever to write
Yeah.
about this person.
And
So
I feel
I
like too, your goal probably there, because like at least to me, the appeal of writing about somebody is who that's alive is that you have access to the primary sources and like you're getting it
yeah,
right from them, and that like that's a different experience than having to dig through, even if the person is still alive. If you're having to dig around them and kind of find stories of other people, it's like A, you're not getting the primary source experience that you wanted, and B, yeah, you're open yourself up to like, okay, well, if you put something in the book
yeah,
that Merle didn't
uh-huh.
want out there, then you kind of open yourself up to. What's
And
funny about that is my first thought was like, well, there's some stuff in the Merle Haggard, and I've met Merle's sons, and they're great people. Like I love those guys to death. But I think Merle's got some stories in there that are pretty wild, and I feel like my first thought was like, oh, okay, maybe that was it. Maybe Merle just had like a history that he didn't want brought to light. But then you look at Randy Travis, and he did way crazier stuff than Merle did.
yeah.
But cool. I mean, I guess it's cool that Randy was willing to talk about it and tell the story.
Well, Merle had done 2 autobiographies, but,
Right.
and that's when I contacted the estate after his death, I thought, here I am, and I could write a great biography on Merle Haggard, and he should have his biography written. And one of his attorneys emailed me, and he said, uh Merle already has 2 biographies, he doesn't need another one, and, so I explained to him that an autobiography and a biography are 2 completely different things because that was Merle's story, and a biography would be researched and have a lot of other people's stories in it, and this guy wrote back to me and told me I was being argumentative.
Right.
I
which
knew
which
I wasn't gonna get anywhere writing
yeah.
Merle's story,
Yeah, well, and
and
like I said, I mean that opens them up too. Like, listen, we put out Merle's story the way Merle wanted it told twice, and like, yeah, like you run the risk of digging up other stories. Like, if Merle wanted those stories in the book, he might have put them in there, and he whatever he left out at this point, he left out for a reason. So,
true, but in a biography, there are a lot of stories that Merle did not know, because
right,
the biography talks to all these other people who can tell you things about the subject that the subject doesn't even know.
right, yeah, he wasn't aware of his impact
Yes,
on
yes,
whatever tangential story comes off of that
and
it's just out of his sphere.
you can
Yeah.
build on things, yes.
Yeah, that's great. But so it sounds like Randy Travis didn't have that problem. They just said,
Uh,
"Come on in."
Well, Randy can no longer talk,
Right.
so I knew I couldn't interview him, or I mean, he can't talk much, but so when he put out his memoir in 2019, then I thought, "There all the I have the basic story with his blessing, it's being told the way he wants it, even though somebody else wrote it." And then I contacted the University of Illinois Press, and I said, "I think we could get a great story here," and they agreed and gave me the contract. So then it took a while to get in touch with Randy and Mary and his publicist to help them understand that this wasn't a hit piece, this was a valid biography,
Yeah.
and it it worked out well. Now there are things in his memoir that don't agree with what I put in the biography because some of the dates were wrong, and I found more information, talked to more people so I could expand on some of the stories.
Yeah.
But Mary helped me. There were several chapters that I sent to her, and she read and she improved them. So, particularly after Randy's stroke and his recovery, and she was a big help in telling that story accurately.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. I know. So, how much of this do you run into when you're doing research and so? I mean, even when I do my 30 to 1 hour, 30 minute to an hour episodes, most of my research is I'm reading people's books, I'm watching YouTube interviews, I'm doing like just kind of what's kind of available at the surface, and even at that level, I find stuff all the time where there will be a story between two people telling the same story about an event that they were both at, and they will tell different accounts of what happened, and like,
Oh
and
yeah.
not close. Like, it'll be, and then of course that opens you up to the internet comments. Everybody, picked whatever version they liked, and they want to correct you on it. But it's like, this is coming from both guys who were at the same place at the same time with completely different memories of how this happened. So
No,
like, yeah, how does that?
that's human nature. And when I get those kinds of things, if if there's something that I'm confident that it went this way, I'll tell it that way. If everything else lines up from other sources and such, or it's possible that I might put both in there and said, this person remembered it this way, this person remembered it this way. And if I don't have enough information, then I just won't mention it at all.
Right, yeah. If it's just if it's slipping more into the legend or lore category,
Right.
maybe just don't mess with it. Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. But yeah, because yeah, I thought it was like I saw, because I thought about doing a Randy Travis episode for a second, and so when I started to kind of look into some of his interviews and stuff, I was cracking up because he went on Ralph Emery's show and just, I mean, starts talking about all these crimes he committed and like, and all this stuff, like talking about wrecked his car doing 120 miles an
Yeah.
hour, and like just tells this, and the story kept getting worse, and it was like he just kept piling details on about, like, oh yeah, I was drunk at the time, and I was like, it just, as if, like, I feel like that's more common now, where people will be more open to talking about past drug use and alcoholism, and things that they might have done or gotten away with. But that interview, I think, was from like the early 2000s or something. And it was like not, at least I feel like on TV at the time, that was not very common for an artist to just come out and be like, here's all this stuff that I did in my wild days. But like Randy Travis seemed to be kind of an open book about that sort of
Well,
stuff.
he was. I mean, he accepted responsibility for what he'd done. He had changed his ways, and and he was proud of how he had turned out as he should be, and that was the one thing that I noticed from reading his memoir and all the trouble he got into, all the news stories and all that. He took responsibility for his actions. He didn't make excuses for, oh, it was somebody else's fault. And I admired him for that. And in our first conversation, his publicist, Zach Farnham, told me that, well, we acknowledge what happened happened. We can't deny that these things happen. And that was an encouragement for me to write the story as it had happened. And I think I did a pretty good job of telling all those and still showing Randy's good side and Randy's wonderful sense of humor, that it all turned out well.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because like for him to be like that, especially at the time where it's like, now that seems to be kind of the obvious way to be, where it's like, look, if you've got stuff if you've got skeletons that you don't want to talk, like, we have the internet, people are gonna find it. And,
They
like,
will.
right. But,
And,
I feel,
that's one of the things when I was working on the biography, like his night out on the road and his car accident and such, these videos are on YouTube, so I
yeah,
can't disregard them, I can't pretend they didn't happen, so what I did was pick out pieces of them and explain them, so that
yeah.
anybody who saw these things on the internet could go to his biography and read them in context and find out what was the story behind this.
Yeah.
But you
Yeah, I
can't
think,
pretend it
yeah.
didn't happen.
Exactly. Yeah, but I think it's a credit to Randy Travis, because he had that attitude long before we had the internet at the level that we have it. Where, like, like, so like that, even that interview that I saw with Ralph Emery in the early 2000s, like, the internet's around, but it's not like it is now. Like, you might have had a hope that people wouldn't find out about that thing you did,
Yeah,
but he seemed to have had what is now the normal and correct attitude about it. He had it even back then when he really didn't have to. He seems like he really kind of just head on to his problems, and like I said, he was kind of an open book about it, which was like I said, it was more admirable then than it is now, and he was still that way back
Well,
then.
because now you can't hide it.
Right, exactly. Yeah, now
That
you don't have a prayer. You
well,
better just
but
anything. Yeah.
that was one of the things, even in his earlier days, I noticed that that's what all the reporters ask about. They wanted to know about his wild teenage days. So those questions always came up because that's what they were interested in hearing about. So
Yeah.
he always had to answer those questions.
Right. Yeah. But like I said, I mean, at the time he could have lied. He
Well,
didn't
true,
really
but
have to
Randy
answer. He could have,
doesn't
he.
lie.
Right. Well, this is my point. Is that it's like, yeah, he back then, like, even if a reporter asks you, you could downplay it, you could whatever, and hope that it never comes out. But
Yeah.
he, he said the story from the jump. He got right out
Yep,
there and told it correctly, which I think that's really cool.
I do
Yeah,
too.
yeah, especially with that level of stories that he that he was being honest about.
Yeah.
It's yeah. And then on top of all of that, to just crank out an amazing career and just be musically undeniable the whole time.
Oh,
And
yes.
yeah, I think that was a he's a cool example. Yeah. It's really interesting now. Like I thought I saw somewhere, is he touring again with like an AI
Yeah.
show thing going on? Like
Well,
what is
it's not AI. They're now calling it the More Life Tour, and that refers to one of the songs that he'd done on his last album, and it talks about having more life. And this is really what they're doing on the tour is more life. And we saw the show, an earlier version of it, when it came to the Corn Palace in South Dakota in 2022, and that was actually the day that I first met Mary and Randy while I was working on the book. But the way the show goes, they've got James Dupre who does the singing, and James was in the last movie that Randy made before his stroke, and they and I talk about that in the book. They built the movie up and made a bigger movie that was released in 2015. But anyway, James was a star in that one. So when they started the More Life tour in 2019, they hired James Dupre to do the singing. So he sings all of Randy's 18 number one songs, and then on a widescreen behind the stage, it shows a lot of the videos and such of Randy. And one of
gotcha.
and they have Randy's actual band is touring with them, the band that Randy had when he stopped performing back in 2013. So one of the neat aspects about the show is you see on the video, Randy is introducing all his players, and then on the
Oh
stage,
wow.
you see a somewhat older version of the same guy waving at the audience. So it's
Wow.
actually his band, it's actually his songs. James Dupre is singing the songs, and then Randy and Mary sit in chairs on the side of the stage, so there's a spotlight on them all
Wow.
the time. So you can watch Randy and Mary enjoying the show and his band performing and James singing the songs, and then Randy gets out there a couple times and sings some songs with James, and Mary tells stories in it. So they're participating in the show.
Wow.
Randy
Yeah.
is not up there doing the singing. He sings a little bit
Right.
to the best of his
Right.
ability.
A couple words here and there. Like I
Like,
saw one where I think he was singing with Carrie Underwood, where he was able to get the last word of the song out and kind of hold a note for a little bit.
well, and that's become a tradition forever and ever, amen.
Yeah.
Whoever sings that song and Randy's there, they always have him sing the amen on it. And then he also can sing Amazing Grace. Cause see, that's one of the things with the damage to his brain from the stroke. It it wiped out the part of the brain where he can come up with this stuff on his own, but he can memorize things. So
Oh.
those songs and things is from the memorization side of the brain. So he works at it to memorize those, and then he can do that. He can't spontaneously
Right.
sing. but
But
he
with enough prep on a song that he remembers well enough, he can
right.
kind of pull it off.
He can memorize how
Wow.
to do it, yes.
That's incredible. What a That's an interesting decision to make. Like the idea that him and his wife are going to go on tour and go through with a show like that is like their decision to be involved at that level is interesting because really it's like people do tribute shows all the time or bands continue on with a different frontman all the time. It doesn't seem to like necessitate Randy being there as far as putting on a show that people will show up to. But for Randy to make that commitment and be trucking himself all over the country to put that kind of a show on for people to have him there, that's a cool decision to make because of the amount of work that puts on him in the state that he's in.
Well,
That's
Randy's an entertainer, and this still gives him a spot in front of the audience, and Mary calls this therapy. They agree that the best therapy for him in reco making improvements after his stroke was to be out among people and
right.
be in the music industry. That's what helps him recover and get, like we said, some of the memory back, and it helps him improve. I mean, he's healthy. He's a healthy person now, except that he can't walk and and speak the results of the
Right.
stroke,
Yeah.
but he's not sick, and he still has a lot of fans out there, and he still wants to see his fans. So when they travel like this, people still treat him like a star, and
Yeah.
he still makes himself available to them.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I guess yeah, when you think of the options, like what's his other option? It's like he can
Yeah,
stay
sit
home
at
in
home.
retirement. Yeah, sit at home and not, get any of those experiences. I guess yeah, when you think about it like that, it's that makes sense to me that he
Because
would
otherwise he would be on a stage singing right now. And
right.
since he can't do that, he's doing the next best thing he can. He's there and he's participating as much as he can. And the people who come to his shows can still see him. They just can't see him performing as he used to.
Right. Yeah, that's a cool idea though, and that's yeah, like I said,
It is.
there's
I
a
think it's a great concept.
yeah, and there like I said, there's something admirable about it to not just stay home and slip into retirement, and yeah,
Yeah, well,
that's
and that's what they found out that didn't work. Like, for the first year after his stroke, they decided they had to get out. They had to go someplace. They had to interact with people, and
yeah,
Randy needed to know that people still cared about him and still remembered him, and it's just increased over the years that it's got to this point that they can do these shows now, and that has helped Randy's health.
yeah, I would imagine, yeah, yeah. Part of me bringing it full circle back to the Fair and Young topic is like that's quite a contrast there, where like man, Randy Travis has every reason to stay home and slip into obscurity from the outside view, where it's like I wonder, and it's like and he's doing it to keep him healthy and he's doing it to keep his mind sharp and to stay, like I
Right.
don't think Randy's worried about his radio plays or his, new music coming out kind of thing like
No,
necessarily, but
no.
uh, I feel like that maybe he's taken the option that we wish Farron would have taken, where you just, you keep going and you find a way to get to your audience and you find a way to keep, not
Yeah.
that you stay relevant, that's not the right word, but to just stay engaged and to keep bringing that energy in from your fans, where, yeah, I think, yeah, maybe Randy's doing it right. And we're
Well,
maybe,
yes, the difference is Farron was at the end of his career at the time. I mean, he didn't have to be, but the way he felt, whether he had lost interest or what, but like I said, I think he was just suffering greatly from depression.
yeah,
And that's what did it. He withdrew and
Yeah.
I think it was due to his depression.
Right. But yeah, but I wonder, I mean, depression is such a moving target. You know, you never, you can never say, oh, well, if he had just done X, Y, and Z, you know, like you can't do that to him. But it does make you wonder where it's like, you know, could he have treated that with the same medicine that Randy Travis is currently, you know, treating his
Well, see,
problem with?
in Farron's case, depression was an unspeakable thing.
Right.
A man
Yeah.
could not admit to feeling depressed, so he couldn't seek help for it because Farron was a macho guy, and macho guys don't suffer from depression.
Right.
And
Yeah,
he
especially
couldn't,
not macho rock stars. Like that's
yeah, he he couldn't acknowledge that that was his problem, so he could only cover it up. Cover it up with being macho, being daredevil, all through the years, all the fights he picked, all he drank, his driving, he was all showing what a tough guy he was. He wasn't about to let his inner feelings of depression hold him down. So it's like he
yeah.
was covering up all those years, and it got to the point where he didn't have that kind of life anymore. And
Yeah.
I think he missed his family, whom he had driven away, and uh, he he
Yeah.
just eventually, I don't know.
Yeah, that's tough. That's a yeah. You never know with those, and I feel like too, it makes you an additional layer of tragedy. You know, is that man? If that same guy had had the same career 20 years later, even like 20 years later, we have enough of an understand, or we have more of an understanding now to where his, you know, some of the things he did might be recognized as a cry for help, or as like, oh,
Yes,
he's suffering
yes,
from this thing that we've seen before with all these other people, and we know how to interact with him positively now.
yep. Well,
But yeah, he didn't have
the
that.
drinking especially, I really noticed that is because he had all these buddies who covered up for him. In 1995, Farron got arrested for DUI, and he got he spent some jail time, and he got the door lock on his car and all that, and he stopped drinking. Well, in the 60s, he got stopped numerous times and charged with DWI, and the judges would let him off. The lawyer would go to court and say, well, Mr. Young can't appear today. And the judge knew it was because he was hungover, and they just let him get by with it. It was an accepted thing to do back then, to
Yeah.
drive drunk and to not have any consequences. And if Farron had been treated in the 60s the way he was treated in the 90s, he he may have stopped drinking 30 years early.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. If consequences had shown up in the same way, that might have been different for him. But you know, that's all might have beens at this point, which yeah, that's tough. But yeah, so I know we're up against time. I know I've kept you for longer than I had said, and I really appreciate you hanging in
Well,
there
it's been
and talking about all
enjoyable.
this stuff. This has been great. Yeah, thank you so much for doing this. And yeah, and like I said, you tell a great story, and your work is awesome. So I'm excited to direct people your way. And yeah, I really appreciate what you're
Oh,
doing. I
great.
think it's cool to keep that part of history alive.
And like you said, we could probably have talked for a long time more.
Oh yeah, no, there's a whole list of things that I'm gonna go home and be like, oh, I should have asked about, you know, X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you
Yep.
so much.
Well,
I know we're
I thank you, George. I enjoyed it.
awesome. Thank you. Well, and yeah, hopefully we'll hear from you again soon.
Okay. Sounds
Alrighty.
good. Thank you.
Thank you.